All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here will be doing a preview and prediction for Kentucky versus Tennessee, a ranked SEC East showdown in Neyland Stadium. 12.5-point spread in favor of Tennessee. 63.5 is the over-under. 7 p.m. Eastern time on ESPN. And then Kentucky, very lopsided series in favor of the Vols. They've only won 3 times, the Wildcats have, since 1984. So a very lopsided series, 82, 26-9 all-time for Tennessee. They are favored in this one by a pretty healthy margin. Looking at this Kentucky offense, Nick, it's been an interesting unit for them because the offensive line, they lost 3 starters last year. They've certainly underperformed quite a bit in all areas, but mainly this offensive front. The running game has not been great this season. They did turn out 239 yards against Mississippi State. Before that, the season high was 121. In the games before that, it's just been a tough sled. Chris Rodriguez, though, his return has been massive for this offense. 131.6 yards per game for him through 3 contests. Up to almost 400 total yards rushing and 3 scores here in just 3 games. Big boost for this offense. He almost had 200 against Mississippi State, allowed them to have some balance. Of course, they lost that South Carolina game. Will Levis did not play in that one. But Rodriguez, his return has done wonders for this unit. You look at Will Levis, though, he's still projected to be a high-end draft pick in April, but he's not exactly exceeding expectations, I would say. Obviously, the offensive line's not helping him out in pass protection. They're in the bottom of the country in a lot of numbers. But his play's also not been great. You've seen that game against Ole Miss. They should have won 3 straight drives there inside plus territory, and they were unable to score. Only put up 19 points in that one. Only had 220 passing yards in that game, but a lot of that was after the catch. Levis, he's, got a lot of potential. He's completing 70%, but he does have 5 interceptions in 6 games, along with those 13 touchdowns. What can you expect from Levis here? Because obviously he's not lived up to the hype in these big-time games during his career here in Kentucky. But this is a big opportunity with a pretty respectable matchup as well. I think if he can start finding his groove and click, Kentucky, they can certainly win this game on his shoulders.
Right, Will Levis hasn't had the best season, but his offensive line has not helped him. He's been sacked 20 times so far this season. The completion percentage is still pretty solid at 69.5%, averaging about 10 yards per attempt with 13 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. He was injured for the game against South Carolina. He missed some time with that finger injury, but overall he's been having a solid season. Certainly not what people expected, but I think those expectations in the preseason were probably a little too high for Levis. I think he's a very talented quarterback, very composed. Completion percentage is, that's what you want to see out of a quarterback, around 70%. Solid year for Levis. Having Chris Rodriguez back is huge for him. They have a balanced attack at Kentucky with these running backs. Several guys, 4 guys have over 20 attempts so far this season. A lot of that's due to injuries, but Rodriguez leading the way with 72 total attempts for almost 400 yards, 5.5 yards per carry, plus 3 touchdowns. I want to see a balance out of this Kentucky offense on Saturday if they're going to have a chance to upset Tennessee here. They're going to have to find a nice groove early on, run the ball, throw the ball, kind of like Alabama did. Alabama was able to have a nice balance, especially running the ball with Jahmyr Gibbs in their loss. Can Chris Rodriguez kind of carry the load like Gibbs did against Tennessee? That would be a recipe for success for Kentucky.
Physical runner in Rodriguez. Gibbs, he's more of an athlete that makes plays with, his vision and his ability to cut. Rodriguez still run straight downhill at you. So I do think that gives them good potential. Look at some of their other weapons, though. Tavion Robinson, of course. He's the lone veteran in this receiving core. After that, it's nothing but freshmen, Berrien Brown. He's got a lot of speed. He's pretty undersized, but he was a big-time playmaker in that Ole Miss game. Kick returns, through the air, catching the ball as well. Dane Key, a true freshman out of Lexington. Those guys both have 300-plus yards receiving, 20-plus receptions on the year. Jordan Dingle, another at tight end. That's about it. Brendan Bates, he's another tight end, has 10 receptions. This is not great production by this receiving core. You kind of knew that would be a problem coming into the year. They don't have much depth one bit at wide receiver, but I think they have solid 3 options I just labeled in Key, Brown, and Robinson. They could really expose this Tennessee secondary that is among the worst in college football in defending the pass. What do you expect here? Because I think this offensive line holds up. They're going to have a field day through the air. Rodriguez, I do think, will be able to provide some good balance. And even Kavazier Smoke, who's been a reliable number 2 during his career.
This Tennessee secondary is very poor, and if they can kind of protect Will Levis and give him an opportunity to throw the ball, I think they have a real opportunity for success here. Robinson leading the way. We thought he'd lead the way as the veteran. 15.7 yards per catch, 3 total touchdowns for him, nearly 400 yards receiving. I look at another guy like Chauncey Magwood as well. He's having a bit of an underrated season. Only 7 catches, but good for 104 yards, 14.9 yards per catch, plus a touchdown for Magwood. The tight end play as well. Jordan Dingle's been involved with 10 catches for 109 yards. plus the 2 scores. I like to see a balanced attack here. Like I said, when you have 2 running backs like Rodriguez and Smoke, you can really kind of balance your attack here, but pick apart that secondary when necessary, because this Tennessee secondary is very poor. If Kentucky can find a groove early on, get comfortable, get the ball out to their speedster and Brown, they can have a recipe for success on Saturday.
And, one big key to winning in Neyland Stadium against an offense like Tennessee is to run the ball, and I definitely think they have the ability to do that, especially with a thumper in the backfield. If they can dominate time of possession, that's going to be a massive key there. Looking at this Tennessee offense, it's 1 or 2 in the country, right next to Ohio State in terms of how good they are. Cedric Tillman, I think he's getting closer to his return, but Jalen Hyatt has completely exploded in his absence. The last 2 games, he's just come to life. Up to 40 receptions, 769 yards, and 12 touchdowns for Hyatt. You look at Hendon Hooker. He's in the thick of things in the Heisman race. If he leads, them to 2 ranked wins here the next 2 weeks against Tennessee and Georgia, he will probably be the Heisman favorite by a quite wide margin, almost 71% completion rate, almost 2,100 yards, 18 touchdowns. Through that first pick of the year against Bama. That's it, though. He does a good job of protecting the football. Of course, this offense, the way they, operate, you don't usually put the ball in a lot of harm's way. They love to attack the boundaries, screens, quick passes, a lot of tempo. These receivers, though, have done a good job winning one-on-one in it. Game, the LSU game, they're abusing some very talented DBs. Same against Bama. Brew McCoy, he had a lot of hiccups during his career until he got to Tennessee. Resurgent year for him, 400 yards almost on 24 grabs. Ramil Keaton, 20 receptions for him. I like Squirrel White as well, a freshman, and then Princeton Fant. He'll get involved a good bit at tight end. But one thing this offense loves to do is the misdirection. They love to use motion, and it really freezes up these secondaries. You get a lot of guys in isolated matchups that really favor this receiving core. And again, these guys do a great job of winning, because outside of Cedric Tillman and now Hyatt, a lot of people are not familiar with this receiving core because they're not deep by any means, but these dudes have been doing a great job of winning their matchups. Look at their top 3 receivers are all averaging over 16 yards per catch. They win downfield, and they do it tremendously. But this running game is where they want to start, and that's usually where they want to end too. Jalen Wright and Jabari Small both have about 400 yards rushing, combined 12 touchdowns, 200-plus rushing yards for this football team. Hendon Hooker, of course, he's big with his legs, a bigger frame. He's always picking up positive yards, 6'4", 218. He was really known for his running ability at Virginia Tech before coming here. He's doing great things for them as a balanced quarterback. The offensive line as well, though, Nick. They've stepped up tremendously. This unit is among the best in a lot of statistics. You got to look at guys like Jerome Calvin, Cooper Mays, Darnell Wright. He's been around a long time at tackle. Gerald Mincy as well at left tackle, a transfer coming over, stepping up big for them. This offense is doing great in all phases. They don't seem to be, they seem to be unstoppable. They scored 52 points against Alabama. They turned around and scored 52 in the first half against UT Martin. These guys are just red hot, the last couple of weeks against some really good teams in conference, because they did the same thing against the Tigers and against the Gators. Overall, what are your thoughts on this offense that had a field day against Alabama and seemed to be in for another great game, as they will be the rest of the year?
This offense is absolute dynamite. 50.1 points per game they're averaging this season, a ridiculous number when you look at that number. This offense has a lot of balance, which balance is key for me in college football in your offense, and they certainly have that with Hooker, Jalen Wright, Jabari Small, and the receiving talents up top with Hyatt, McCoy, and then once Tillman returns, Hendon Hooker, you can't ask for a better season so far for him. Nearly 71% completion percentage, the 1 interception, which honestly is impressive in itself that he made it this long and only has 1 pick so far this season. 18 touchdowns through the air for him, plus the 3 on the ground, so 21 total touchdowns for Hooker. Jalen Hyatt having an incredible season. Almost 770 receiving yards on 40 grabs, plus the 12 touchdowns. Had a day against Alabama, of course. He has turned himself into a national name overnight, a super talented wide receiver who has so much speed, can really dominate you, destroy your secondary. Brew McCoy's having a great season quietly as well. This is a guy that we wondered if he would step up, considering the depth problems, especially once Tillman got hurt. We had to see someone step up, and McCoy's done that. Nearly 400 yards, 16.5 yards per catch, 2 touchdowns for McCoy. Ramil Keaton as well, having a quietly solid season, the 17.9 yards per catch, 3 touchdowns on 20 grabs for him. That guy like Squirrel White's getting involved a little bit every once in a while, 19.5 yards per catch for him in the touchdown. I love this offense top to bottom. They really trick you. They play with your mind. They got the misdirection running. They're able to hit you in so many different ways, on the ground, through the air, whatever it is. This Tennessee offense is one of the best we've seen in a very long time in the SEC. They have a ton of talent top to bottom. They're going to continue to put points up on the board.
And what they want to do is they want to start by being able to run the ball. They spread you out, run between the tackles, 3 or 4 yards, and then they'll go fast. Doesn't have to be anything major. That's all they need, just a couple. Nothing too big on the ground for them, and that's how their offense gets going. That's going to be the biggest key, and that's where we're going to look at this Kentucky defense. It's front 7, very talented, very good, a lot of seniors. I think they've been very good against the run this year. They look at the game against Florida and gave up 136 yards, but they faced a similar style of offense against Ole Miss a couple weeks back, and they gave up 186 yards, almost 4.8 yards per carry. It's a team that loves to get the ground game going. They want to go fast, and that's where it starts. So I think this is certainly going to be an interesting challenge. And I think the Tennessee O-line's better than the Ole Miss one. So that's where it's going to start, and then that's going to be after that. If you can slow down the run, then you'll like your chances against the pass, because, slowing down that tempo, especially on the road, is going to be super important. I think overall so far they've done a good job of slowing down the run, but not so much of getting into the backfield. The production from this defensive line is not exactly impressive. Of course, outside linebacker Jordan Wright, Keaton Wade stepped up a good bit. Kentucky doesn't have much of a pass rush, Nick. Only 10 sacks in 7 games. That's not great. They still have very good enforcers, though, like J.J. Weaver. Just not sure what his health status is. Jaquez Jones as well. I know he's missed a couple of games. This is a team that needs these guys on the field. Jones has not played the last 2. I'm not sure what his status is. If those guys can't get the go, that's obviously going to be big. DeAndre Square, though, leading the team with 52 tackles. Wright, getting him back was tremendous. I'm kind of concerned because I'm not sure what the health is for this team, even if those guys can play. But the pass rush is definitely a concern. This is a team that already moves fast to begin with, though, so that kind of neutralizes you if you do have a pass rush. So maybe that's not that big of a concern. But Kentucky, I don't know if they can really match up in the secondary. Last year, they got absolutely burned. I think they gave up like 7 plays of 30-plus yards through the air against Tennessee. It was something major at home. They absolutely gashed. 316 yards and 4 touchdowns. Allowed 75% completion rate. And, what was a shootout in Lexington. It just wasn't pretty. I think their secondary is probably taking a bit of a step back. You won't see that on the stat sheet. They're playing very good football. 4 touchdowns allowed, only 6 picks, 56% completion rate allowed, only 6.2 yards per attempt for the opponent. And they did a great job against Ole Miss at getting their hands in the passing windows. Those vertical seam routes did not seem to really work that much for Ole Miss. Even though they were running the ball pretty efficiently, they couldn't make plays through the middle. A lot of batted balls, some really good coverage by Kentucky in that one. So that's something that I think you got to keep in mind, is how well they played in that game. A lot of young guys really stepping up. You got Carrington Valentine, one of the best in the back end. Tyrell Ajon is strong safety. He's probably their best defensive back. And then Keydron Smith at corner. These guys, a handful of veterans, a handful of young guys. Big time task for this secondary, really for this entire defense, because they're going to have you on your heels the whole time. But Carrington Valentine, 7 pass breakups this year. I would imagine he'll probably be the guy that gets, matched up with Hyatt quite a bit. What are your expectations for this defense? Because they are kind of iffy against the run, even though I think they played quite well against Ole Miss for that style of attack. And that's the best footage we have for this game. I think they might match up pretty well if they're fully healthy here.
This is a banged-up unit, but as long as they get healthy, I think they do have a chance to match up very well. I like the idea of putting Valentine on Hyatt. I think he's got to be the guy to cover him. 7 pass breakups this year, plus the interception for Valentine. 24 total tackles. I want to see him on Hyatt potentially on Saturday. DeAndre Square leading the way. He's a bit of a leader for this team. 52 total tackles plus a sack and an interception as well. The sacks, they haven't been able to really get off the quarterback, but I don't think that's necessary against Tennessee. With the tempo, like you said, I don't really know if that's necessary to get after the quarterback here. And I think as long as they can stop the run and force Hendon Hooker to throw, which, he's been very good throwing so far this year, but I think you want to force him to throw to give yourself a better opportunity, considering the defensive backs here are not that bad. Jordan Lovett's having a solid season as well, 2 pass breakups for him, plus the 28 total tackles. Maybe you want to see a little bit more out of him. Jordan Wright and Jaquez Jones, as long as they're healthy and playing, these guys are both solid leaders for the linebacking core. 33 total tackles for Wright, plus 31 for Jones. The pass breakups are certainly there for Wright and Jones as well. This front 7, I like this linebacking core a whole lot. I'm very impressive, and I think the defensive backs are solid as well. Some serious leaderships here. I think they have some serious talent. Keydron Smith as well, 4 pass breakups plus the interception. Alex Safari Jr., he's having a little bit of a season as well, of 18 total tackles for him. I'd like to see him get involved a little bit more on Saturday. So I certainly like this Kentucky defense. I just worry keeping up with the tempo against Tennessee is going to be difficult for any defense in this country. I think that they might struggle a little bit.
Kentucky ranks 123rd in college football tackles for loss, only 29. They've not been just poor on the offensive side of the trenches, but the defensive side as well, which is very disappointing because they have a lot of talent. Guys like Justin Rogers, Octavius Oxidine, Josiah Hayes. This was a unit I was very happy with coming into the year. They've just underperformed tremendously. Out of those 29 tackles for loss, only 3.5 are from interior defensive linemen or even edge rushers as well. So I know that they run a 3-4 scheme and whatnot, so the outside linebackers have, a big-time role to play. But this interior D-line's been tremendously underwhelming, I'd say, this year, Nick. Obviously, holding runners in their tracks, that's one thing. They don't always have to show up on the stat sheet. And that can be said about Kentucky. But you need to force negative plays against this offense. That's just going to make things so much easier. But so far, they've not really shown the ability to do that. They only had 4 tackles for loss against Ole Miss. Their linebacking core played exceptional in that game, though, but can't really rely on that here week to week against Tennessee, especially on the road. How do you feel about this defensive line being a bit underwhelming, and who do you think is going to win that matchup in the trenches?
I think it's disappointing that guys like Walker and Oxendine really just haven't shown what we expected out of them so far this year. Walker, 17 tackles, Oxendine, 14. Justin Rogers as well, 11 tackles. These guys really just haven't lived up to the expectations. Josiah Hayes, 5 tackles for him as well. So we need to see more of these guys. I do like this Tennessee offensive line. I think the offensive line for Tennessee does win the battle in the trenches, and currently I think they have the matchup sort of advantage here. But they're going to have to expect. You need to see a lot of talent and a lot of explosiveness out of this Kentucky team if they want to upset Tennessee here. They're going to have to get after the quarterback and be able to stop the run very early on to make Tennessee uncomfortable and throw the ball.
Now we're going to have the Tennessee defense giving up over 23 points per game. We'll get right to it on this defense, though. 130th in college football pass defense. We figured this unit was going to be improving this year because last year they were very bad, but they got even worse. And now that Warren Burrell is out for the year, they got absolutely gashed against Alabama. This secondary, not good one bit. Giving up 312 yards per game. Gave up 300 plus the UT Martin. Of course, it might be a little skewed because they're absolutely hammering them in that one. But this is a theme all year. They've given up 300-plus yards in 4 straight games. Gave up 453 to Anthony Richardson, Florida-led passing attack. That's not good one bit, Nick. These are not garbage time numbers either. Florida was well in that game for a good 3 quarters, really, until a fumble. Those are all legit numbers, especially in that first half. They were throwing all over that zone defense. Guys were wide open. And that is, again, not a very good passing attack one bit. So that was very shocking. I just don't know what they can do to get better in the second. I think this year they're really just going to have that at their disadvantage. But, again, one great way to neutralize that is to have your defensive line step up. Byron Young, Tyler Barron as well. Their pass rush hasn't exactly been unleashed. Only 17 sacks for them. Young leads with 3.5. They haven't exactly been great. Amari Thomas, though, stepping up on the interior. Bryson Eason. I do think that's one encouraging part of this defense is their interior D-line. It was a bit of a concern as well. I think they're playing some pretty good football. The most rushing yards they've allowed this year was 141 each to Pittsburgh and Florida. In Pittsburgh, they had like a 76-yarder to start the game, and then that game ended up going to overtime as well. So they held up pretty well against Pittsburgh. 5 seniors up front for them. Florida, a very impressive offensive line. They were able to hold that running game in check. Alabama only had 114. They're fighting from behind. Only averaged about 3.7 yards per carry. So I think this run defense is actually quite respectable. Only 2.8 yards allowed per carry on the season, mainly because of 2 linebackers that have absolutely been great. Jeremy Banks, he was the top-end playmaker for them a season ago, but Aaron Beasley stepped up immensely alongside him, 39 tackles. And then you also have Wesley Walker, a DB transferring over. I think that's a guy who's going to have to continue to step up for this unit. Overall, I think this is a respectable defense for Tennessee, but their secondary, again, is a big-time concern. Trevon Flowers, he's their best defensive back, I would say. But not a lot of playmaking in the back end and a lot of yards given up. That's going to be Kentucky's way to victory in this one. How do you think they square up here against a Kentucky O-line that is obviously very bad, but if they can't get after the quarterback, it's going to be a long day?
This secondary for Tennessee is
very poor. If there's going to be anything that holds this Tennessee team back from winning the SEC and potentially a national championship, it's going to be the secondary. And we saw it, at certain times last year for Ohio State. This is something that can compare similar. Their secondary was poor last year. Tennessee's is just as poor, roughly something like that. And, this is not a great look for Tennessee. If Will Levis is comfortable in the pocket, if this offensive line holds up for Kentucky, he'll have all day to throw, be able to pick out his talented wide receivers. Trevon Flowers is having a solid season, obviously leading the team in tackles with 40 tackles. He has 1 sack. Aaron Beasley, Jeremy Banks, neither of them have sacks. They have, Beasley 39 total tackles, Banks 29 total tackles. These guys are leaders in the locker room, solid linebackers. I like the leadership they have there. Byron Young is the sacks leader with 3.5 sacks. You need to unleash him. If you can get after the quarterback on Saturday, put Will Levis in the dirt, I think they have a really serious chance to beat Kentucky here. But if they can't get this pass rush going and struggle to get these big guys past the offensive line, they're going to struggle all day as Will Levis will just pick them apart in the secondary.
Now, Tennessee has allowed 40-plus attempts per game because they've been ahead in all these games, and these teams are playing catch-up, so that could certainly skew it, maybe just a little bit, but I don't think so. You have 45 and 52 attempts to Florida and Alabama, and those guys were just throwing it all over the place, and, they had that many attempts. They only had 1 sack each in both of those games. They teed off on a poor LSU offensive line, so, they ran up the numbers a bit in that one that scored 5 sacks, but two mobile quarterbacks in Florida and Alabama's Richardson and Young. Will Levis is really not that mobile, so I do think they can keep him in the pocket. But Levis has that potential to really just rip it across the middle, even in pressure, even though, some of the, confusion for him in the back end has really been one thing that really struggles him. Pre-snap to post-snap reads have been an issue for Levis, so I think that's something they might look to do more so than just unleashing, a 5 or 6 man blitz. But so we'll see what happens. I guess they did face a mobile quarterback against LSU and did a good job against him as well. But for the most part, the secondary is not really helped out. An ailing secondary, and I do think they're going to struggle big time. Before we move to the team comparisons overall, what do you think this defense can do in this game? And what do you expect? Because it's really up in the air because of the poor offensive line, but I think that they're probably going to give up a lot of yards and a lot of points in this one.
I think Kentucky will score a lot of points in this one. I think it's more about whether or not the Tennessee offense can outpace the Kentucky offense at this point. I think it'll be a similar shootout to what we saw against Alabama, a few weeks ago. I think that is a really good comparison here. I think both these offenses are high flying. The defenses have to leave a little bit to be desired, especially Tennessee. I think Banks and Beasley need to be able to get in the backfield potentially. As long as they can stop the run and be strong in the tackles. Banks has a couple strong tackles against Jahmyr Gibbs at points in the Alabama game. If we'd see something like that, I think that can certainly help out this Tennessee defense. They're going to have to figure out something with the secondary. I know they're banged up, and that certainly is a reason to play this poor, but they cannot continue to play this season giving up as many points as they do, because they'll find themselves in trouble against one of the better teams in the nation, such as Georgia, Ohio State, or Alabama again.
We have the team comparisons. I think at quarterback, Tennessee has the edge there. I want to give them the edge at running back as well, but Chris Rodriguez, I think he's just a great individual player. Has really uplifted this offense. Wide receiver, Tennessee, they're going to get the edge there, especially if Tillman comes back. Offensive line, pretty unanimous there. Polar opposites. Kentucky's been very poor. Tennessee's been very good. But on defense, I'm going to give them the edge in all spots. I don't want to give them the edge on the defensive line. I guess you could probably call that even, because they've just not been very productive one bit. But I do think they're a little bit deeper than Tennessee is. Vol fans will probably disagree with that one, and I can totally understand. Linebacker, what is it, 4 seniors, I believe, or 3 seniors, and Weaver. I think he's a year younger than that. Linebacker, very stacked core there for them, even though Beasley and Banks are phenomenal in the interior. And then in the secondary, pretty easy decision there. They have more picks than touchdowns allowed, while Tennessee is, again, 130th in college football. What do you disagree with maybe on these team comparisons?
I would call the defensive line even currently right now. I think that both leave a lot to desire and both have disappointed. I think Kentucky's disappointments, we really did not expect them to disappoint like this. We had high expectations for this defensive line. They're really not living up to it. Tennessee, I wasn't sold on the defensive line in the offseason, so this one, even with a guy like Byron Young, I just really wasn't sold on their defensive line, so I'm not entirely shocked they're underperforming, but both those defensive lines have been poor. I would consider that even. The rest of the thing hit the nail on the head here. Kentucky's running back, I think Chris Rodriguez is just a little bit better than the 1-2 pairing they have at Tennessee. And I also would take the Kentucky linebackers just because the amount of quality they have in those 4 guys is so solid. I know that the 2 Tennessee linebackers, Beasley and Banks, are very talented. I've been raving about them all season. I did that in the preseason as well. But I think when you have 4 guys that can produce on any given Saturday, you're going to have to take that linebacking core.
We got final thoughts in the prediction. I think the biggest key for Kentucky is time of possession. And, the offensive line, of course, they need to hold up a good bit. And that, on the flip side of things for Tennessee, unleash this pass rush. They need to start getting home, because I do not want to, even playing in Neyland Stadium, I do not want to go against a potential top overall quarterback in the upcoming draft to just sit back in the pocket and pick us apart, because I do believe he can, even though he hasn't been able to really show that in these big-time games. That potential is certainly there, and you do not want to be messing with fire. So I think for Tennessee, outside of, just running your offense, you got to find a bit of a pass rush. And I think how this game will go is I think Tennessee is going to give up a good bit of yards and some points, but I do think they're going to have more stops than Kentucky will on defense. So I do think that the, more forced punts or, more forced, turnover on downs, whatever it may be. I don't think Tennessee will give up too many touchdowns late in this game. I think they'll get off the field just enough to win this one. I'm going to go 45-31. Tennessee. I really think Kentucky can win this game, especially if their offensive line starts to bring the physicality to them, which is certainly possible because this Tennessee defense up front has been, a bit of a mixed bag at times. So I think Kentucky, they can certainly win this game. They're still looking. I think they have it's a long shot, I think, but they can certainly still get into the playoffs as they play Tennessee and Georgia here. I think that's certainly on their mind. So I think they can compete in this one. But overall, I like Tennessee to win this one and set up a top 2 or 3 showdown next week in Athens.
I also like Tennessee in this one. I'm taking them 49-38. I think Kentucky has a real opportunity to compete in this game. I think it might be a lot closer than some people expect. I think they'll cover the spread, which is currently 12.5. The line shifted 1 point since it opened at 11.5 on Sunday. I think this Kentucky's offense is talented. I think they have a real opportunity here to put up a ton of points against a poor defense. But I think that Tennessee's offense just has enough firepower to beat them. I think they'll have the time possession they want, and they'll be able, like you said, force a few stops on defense. And Kentucky might get rattled in that hostile environment. And Neyland, tough place to play. So I'm going to give the home team advantage here, 49-38. But it should be a fun game to watch.
It's going to be it for today's episode, guys. As always, Nick, I appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.